My name is Pablo Korona. I'm from Rockford, Illinois. I'm a video producer. I've been doing video for roughly about 10 years in Rockford. And it's been an amazing thing because my first gig actually doing video in Rockford was doing the campaign commercials for the mayor. So it was interesting to start out with that, and that's really given me a lot of access to a lot of really interesting things in my city. And it's been a pretty, I don't know, let's take 16 months back. Let's start here. I was working a job, and what I was creating in this job wasn't really what I felt I wanted to do with my life. Who's all been there, right? So I quit, and there's this piece of advice Ira Glass gave that if you want to align your creative taste and what you produce, create a large volume of work. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to create some kind of social contract to say that I'm going to do a video every 2 weeks. Okay, I'll do this thing called Our City, Our Story, and I'm going to do stories about my city. And as soon as this idea came up, there was a lot of bad press for the city that I live in. The Wall Street Journal had us did a whole picture series of job-starved city. Forbes magazines had us on the worst lists. You name it. You know all the lists they create to sell more magazines? We were on them. And there was this kind of pride bubbling up from people that were saying, no, that's not us. Because the national magazines are telling a solitary story. They're looking at the statistics and looking at what Rockford is based upon this, on the crime. And like I said, I've been doing video from the top to the bottom in Rockford, seeing behind the scenes of a lot of things. And also, you have a lot of manufacturing there that is absolutely wonderful. And a lot of really tidbits that have been existing in Rockford that not a lot of people know. So I wanted to create a project to get all these things out there. So I started creating a metaphor video. I thought, if I find an embroiderer to talk about the stitches in an embroidered logo, that'd talk about the importance of every single story in the community being like a single thread in this embroidered logo. Collectively, it's an identity. So I walked into a tailor shop because I thought that maybe these people would be able to understand how threads work, knots, stitches. I talked to Tony, and Tony he started talking about the stitching, and it just wasn't working out. I said, fine, Tony, just talk about you.
My dad was known in some circles as the singing tailor. There's stories of where people would bring something in, and he would make them sit and listen to the new song that he had written. You don't have to pay me, just sit and listen to my song.
And so Tony's story started turning out to be his dad's story. He inherited the tailor shop from his father. And I started putting this story together, and I was like, this is really neat. There's a lot of depth to Tony and the tailor shop. He's, fun musician. And I was like, Tony, can I use some of your father's music in the piece? And he's like, well, I don't know, you got to talk to my nephew. I said, okay. So I went and talked to his nephew. And his nephew, little Vince, said, how much do you know about my grandfather? I said, not a lot. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, oh no, the story's not done yet. I thought it was done. And so the story of Vince the tailor is pretty incredible. Vince the tailor he was a tailor back in the day. Everybody wore suits. And, it was a pretty lucrative business because everybody's wearing it. He went down to Nashville and recorded music down there. Glenn Campbell played on his record. He's had a hit song on the Hee Haw Show. He's got a song in the Country Music Hall of Fame, like really reputable stuff. And he had a really diversified the record label at the time, and he had a lot of R&B on his record label. And so then he started telling me about the story about this car pulls up outside the tailor shop. And this bunch of people get out and they come into the tailor shop, and
Look like a bunch of bums.
Having like a hole in the middle of their car and the kids like having no shoes and coming in, giving them a demo.
Buddy, you're gonna publish your songs? So I said, well, who you are? And they told me, well, we call ourselves the Jackson 5.
So Jackson
wasn't
5
nothing to me that
pulled
time.
right up to the,
My
to the
grandfather
tailor
just
shop
passing them
and
along to
wanted to be
his
signed
friend
by Vince.
in Motown named Barry Gordon.
And he passed
And
it along
he
to
wanted to
Motown
invest
with Barry Gordy.
$2,000
Just passed it along, didn't
in
pay any attention to
album
it.
they did.
And
I figured out
Vince
that
is supposed to be a
he told
tastemaker.
me, says, if you
He's
do
supposed
that,
to know music.
I guarantee
And he
in
missed the
2-3
biggest
years,
one of the biggest
you're gonna be a
opportunities,
rich
right?
man.
Huge.
I said,
It's been a little
and
running
he's still
joke
the
that
guy-
how is he going to be any good at music if he can't even see good talent when it's in front of him? I sit down with him and ask him questions. How is that? And what did you learn from that?
Never be jealous of anybody, because that's no good. And when you're happy for everybody, everybody will be happy for you.
Well, I resurrected Rockford College Radio, formerly known as WRCR. I look up to what he tried to do, and I'm trying to do the same thing with this radio station. Along with being a musician myself, like my grandfather, I try to promote my music through the radio station, but also have a show called Rockford Originals.
So I walked into a tailor shop, found out about a record label that used to be in town who missed one of the biggest opportunities you could have as being a record producer. To then see his grandson completely look past the regret and the possible fortune. And he looked at the music. He plays his grandfather's songs throughout the city. It's a really emotional thing. And it all happened by walking into a tailor shop. That's something that cities, when they look to even promote themselves, they keep on pushing the same gems and jewels that they have. And there's so much more character and flavor to the identity of a place. And oftentimes people don't even know what they have. Like Andy. Andy was a friend of mine. She used to be a waitress at a downtown restaurant I went to. And she quit and started farming. I didn't see that coming, but it's from a whole long line of farmers she is. And so I asked, can I do a story about you? She goes, well, I don't know, why?
These are the clean farmer hands. This is my stamp of authenticity. What is unusual about me is that I'm a single woman farmer. It's totally built for men, all of it. Tractors are man size, the tools are man size, and then you come in as a woman and you're like, dude, not only is this piece of equipment like twice as heavy as I need it to be, it's at the wrong angle because it's built for a guy that's 6 foot tall and I'm only 5 feet. That's the crazy stuff when you're like, God, it's rototiller. Terrible, because they're all made for men. Oh, the first years where I didn't really have tractors and I was doing the walk behind rototiller, oh my God. My brother came over and ran it for me one day when I was really behind. He did it for like 45 minutes. He's like, how are you doing this? And I'm like, remember last week when you were telling me I was too skinny? I'm like, that's why. Because I'm farming like 3 acres with a walk behind rototiller. Yeah. So this plant grows like this if I plant it on the 1st of May, and if I plant the same plant on the 15th of May, it's different. It's all about light and temperature. Like it's so freaking complicated. Like it's gonna take me my whole life. I love it. Don't you love that? When you're like, I will never exhaust my passion for this.
And so I played it for her, and she couldn't process what was captured. She's like, I didn't know I was that significant. We talked to a farm-to-table restaurant in town, said that they started because Andy started doing farming, and they saw that it was viable to do farm-to-table. So waitress, yay tall, changed the face of State Street by really looking at what she's done. Looking back, she stepped up her game. So now she's inside of a couple organic markets in the city, and she's also in a lot of farm-to-table restaurants, and she's this close to being in Whole Foods. Just recognizing the potential that she had. And I mean, she kind of knew it, but when it was portrayed to her, like, this is what you're doing, this is why you're significant, it clicked. Similar, Joe Gorel. Joe was a vandal. He was a graffiti artist, but just defaced a lot of property. And he was one of 3 that were arrested, and he watched the mayor do this press conference announcing his arrest from in jail. Well, 6 years later, he's getting a handshake from the mayor because Joe is the one that puts together our St. Patrick's Day parade. Completely flips it around. And it's a great story from handcuffs to handshakes. And that story then is now used by his former therapist to show other kids that you can change. Jimmy Goodman, story about a boxer on 7th Street in Rockford. There's nothing happening down there. And because of him, volunteer boxer, there's these kids that run around the block for exercise. And after the story we did on him, club doubled in size. Now, it's also about being kind of in tune with this project, what's kind of happening. And there's this really interesting company near us.
When I first started cutting gears, I just cut the gear and be done with it, ship it on to the customer. Now here you cut the gear, test it, and then it goes to Mars, you know. So.
Anything that moves on the rover, any of the actuators, any of the gears, we cut all the gears that did that.
Forest City Gear in Rockton, right near Rockford, they cut 100% of the gears on the Mars rover Curiosity. You know, Rockford, we're this miserable place. It's a completely dangerous place. And yet, you look at all the different things within our community that start adding flavor. And Forest City Gear knew what they did was significant, but no one else around really knew it. And so when I called them up at first and asked them if they had a gear on there, they said, yeah, when we did all of them, I was floored. And there was a little bit of publicity, but when I walked in there and artfully shot everything, it kind of took a new perspective. It had a lot of reverence when you're standing in there and I'm projecting onto the machines that created the gears, the product. A really full circle moment. And it was very well received.
I have 3 young boys, and they just think that's the coolest thing that their dad was able to work on something that's now on Mars. Years ago when we were working on the project here, they were able to come through the plant and they were able to touch some of the gears, so they think that's pretty cool too, that they were actually able to touch them and now they're up there also. It's a generational thing, it's something that, I did it, I can tell my kids that I did it, and hopefully they can tell their kids, hey, their grandpa put something up there one day, so it's kind of a neat thing.
So this story kind of blew up, and it took all of our city, our story with it. Like, I got a profile at Fast Company, Menta Floss did a piece, Washington Post blog. I got an email from the press secretary of NASA. It was pretty cool. So the important thing to consider with our city, our story, is that all these stories are happening at the same time. It's not like, okay, everybody stop and focus on this story and then this story. They're all happening at the same time. And that's the goal of our city, our story, is to help paint a much richer identity for a community. To look at it and say, look at the respect, the pride, the craftsmanship, the creativity, all of that happening at the same time within this area. And oftentimes the project, we expose things that people really didn't know about before. And there's other times where it just takes on its whole entire new meaning. And the story that I was most interested in was this archaeologist from Rockford. He started the Oriental Institute in Chicago. He popularized the notion that civilization started before the Greeks and Romans. Before this, ancient history was this much in your thick textbook in history. And he wrote the book on ancient history, a guy from Rockford. Changed the way the world looks at itself. And that's a really colossal thing. And so, to tell this story, I needed a colossal voice. And one artist in town is named Jim Julien. Big, booming voice, sweet as pie. He knows so much about Rockford history, and his connections in the community is so deep. Last summer, he came down with cancer. And he sat in his hospital room knowing that he had days to live, and there was people funneling in to see him. And these Our City, Our Story films are shown down at Davis Park, and loudspeaker broadcast in the city. So Jim Julien, Friday night, he sits intubated in his hospital room, unable to speak, loved ones coming to see him and he can't talk to them. And down at Friday Night Flicks, we showed the James Henry Rest in Peace with his voice. So as he sat in his hospital room intubated, we boomed his voice all over the downtown that he loved. And it was at that moment that I realized that this project was just an attempt for me to do something to try to find my voice. It was giving voice to others. Thank you.